4, 3, 2, 1. Kathleen Covalt, welcome to Nature of Reality Radio. I saw your presentation on the Portal to Ascension site about the UFO updates that have been happening leading up to the present moment. Very, very fascinating. And by the way, I'm sorry to all my listeners about my long hiatus. I haven't been doing a show in seems like a month and a half now. I've been getting a new computer. The other one was self-restarting to prevent overheating all the time, and I had to wait until my folks got back from their trip before I could get the new computer installed. But that's taken care of, so I'm back with a vengeance, and hope to be doing lots of shows in the near future. So, without further ado, Kathleen Covalt, please introduce yourself, your life story from a primary source perspective, and then we'll get into the very serious nitty-gritty stuff, particularly about UFOs and the updates and everything. Briefly cover over everything that you talked about in your presentation, maybe do a quick little abridged version of everything and that, and then we'll get into some of your some other things, and I'll use your site as a guide. So thank you very much. You got the floor.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, I'll go back to the summer of 2000, and my husband and I were living in Illinois at the time. That's how we met. We were fellow students in a doctoral program out there. We both got our doctorates in educational psychology from Northern Illinois University. And so we got married, and we were living in a little townhome. And my husband loves the Olympics, and we were watching the Summer Olympics, which were taking place in Sydney, Australia in the year 2000. And so it's opening ceremonies, and they're doing all these kinds of dancing and art things. And here, out of the middle of the ground, comes this huge art installation that's this huge head with these really big eyes. And I knew that this was important for some reason. I didn't know what it meant that this huge head was looking at me, but I knew I really have to pay attention to this. So after that night, I researched it, and that happened to be a depiction of a wangina, which is an Aboriginal. They were painted in the caves in the western part of Australia. They date back to 3,000 to 30,000 years ago. And the Aboriginal people believe that these beings that look like this with these big heads and these big eyes were visiting them. And they still want to maintain contact with them. So every year, some specially tasked person comes and redoes the artwork so that you can still see the artwork in the caves. It's like a ceremonial type of time when they repaint it. So I knew this was important. Well, only a few months later, I really wanted to move back to the East Coast. I'm originally from New Jersey, a Jersey girl, and I wanted to go up to New York State. I'd been up there a couple times. It's so beautiful. And so in the fall, we moved back to the Hudson Valley of New York. I had no idea that back in the 1980s, there was a UFO flap. And so I was teaching part-time at the State University of New York in New Paltz, and they had a wonderful little bookstore in the town. And my husband and I were looking at all the books, and we came upon this shelf, and there was this little postcard on the top, and it says, "Do you know who your neighbors are?" And under it was a book, Silent Invasion by Ellen Crystal. And we bought it, of course, because on the cover was a head so similar to the wangina. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know that guy. And we bought the book, and it was talking about all the experiences she personally had and other things she was researching in the area about people having experiences with not only lights in the sky, but beings as well. So we were like, oh my gosh, this has been going on all around us in this area. We then met a wonderful couple who ran a support group for people who had experiences, because it was worse. It's not great now, it's getting better, but it was worse then, where when people had experiences, they really couldn't tell their family or friends what they were experiencing. They get mocked, they get laughed at. Nobody wanted to listen to them. So this support group met every single month. People from all over would come and tell their story in a safe space. And my husband and I went every single month and heard all of these amazing stories. Well, I also have a master's degree in counseling, so I'm very aware of the nuance of emotional expression when you're telling a story or whatever. And I knew these people had had real experiences. So we were hooked and we started researching the whole UFO phenomena. And then we decided to move some years later to Ohio, and we raised sheep and chickens. And then we decided to come back to Pennsylvania. So I've moved a whole bunch of times. And while we were here, it was December 16th, 2017, when the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Politico, all three on the same day, put out a story about ATIP, or the Advanced Threat Identification Program that the U.S. government had, and that Luis Elizondo was leaving that program in protest because he wasn't being able to get information up the chain to the then Secretary of Defense, who was James Mattis, who Luis Elizondo had spent some time in like a combat situation with, and he greatly revered. So he secretary this information about all the information he was getting from this UAP, which they changed the term from UFO to UAP, which now stands for unidentified anomalous phenomena. It's had some different iterations of the term. But anyway, Andrew, that's my background. Started in the year 2000, had all these wonderful people tell me their experience, kind of left it for a little bit, and then I came right back in 2017 because I knew culturally something important was going on.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at your site here. See the first question on, have you ever wondered, it says, and the first question is, what is the nature of reality? Well, how fitting that I have you as a guest on my show, because that's the very first question you feel is worth talking about, and that's the title of my show, and nobody has a more difficult time understanding the nature of reality than I. That's why I am the host of this show. So, well, I guess we'll touch on that and other things, but I really, even though you did talk about this in great detail in your presentation interview with Neil Gore and Portal to Ascension, I do encourage people to watch that presentation on the Portal to Ascension website. I think it's also on the New Realities website with YouTube channel, excuse me, New Realities and Portal to Ascension YouTube channels, where you had talked about the UFO updates that have been going on since 2017, December 2017, with that whole thing with the Tic Tac UFO, leading up to the present moment. It's all the rage. Well, is it really all the rage now? I mean, it seems like the world hasn't changed. It's the same old world out there, even though they, for all intents and purposes, announced in Congress, yes, there are UFOs, and yes, there are extraterrestrials involved with those UFOs. For those that aren't familiar with this and have been basically living in a cave and aren't aware of this, I guess I need to ask you, what is that all about? What am I talking about for those that are ignorant of this? What happened in Congress recently? And then why don't you give a nice little abridged version? And I hate to do this to you to make you talk about this abridged version, but again, the info is already out there. People can watch it on the presentation that you did on the Portal to Ascension and New Realities YouTube channels. So that can be watched. But please do touch on that, what was said in Congress, and give a nice little abridged rundown of that presentation that you gave and the very important key points in it going from 2017 to the present moment.
Sure. Well, I completely agree with you that this was a culture-changing time, that this was a point in history that we will look back on, this congressional hearing. I agree with you that the culture has changed, but so many people don't know it. And I guess it's going to be a slower process to get everybody on board. But this was a marker, 100% this was a marker the other day. So what happened, abridged, is, as I mentioned, I started getting involved again in December 16th, 2017, very similar to when I saw that one Gina head in the Australian Summer Olympics, and I knew that was important. Interestingly, by the way, I didn't mention that piece of the Summer Olympics was called The Awakening, and it was an awakening for me. And so in December 16th, 2017, when those articles came out, again, I knew that was another marker in time, just like this hearing was. So what happened was these videos were released, 2 of them at the exact same day and another one a couple months later, and they became famously known as the Tic Tac video, the Gimbal video, and the Go Fast video. The Tic Tac incident happened in 2004 off of the Pacific, and there was a whole carrier strike group that contained, these huge boats with radar that the Navy planes land on and take off of. There was a submarine associated with it. There was a whole bunch of military equipment out there in the Pacific. And the radar operators on the USS Princeton had been getting indications that there was something in the sky that was dropping down out of space. It was hovering or it was going down near the water, but there was a lot of them that would do this. And at first they thought something was wrong with their radar equipment. And then the one day, the infamous day, famous day, when Commander David Fravor took off, and he's in his, I think it was a FA-18 Super Hornet, and he takes off and he has a wingman with him. The wingman happens to be a woman, and they have backseaters, and they're going out to train, and they get a message from the command saying, we're going to do a real world operation. We're going to send you for something real world. And so they thought, oh, okay, it's going to be drug runners or something, So they said, go out to this point. So they start changing where they were going, and they start going out to another point, and they're getting information. Okay, you're getting close, and they were giving them, a countdown on how close they were getting to the object, but they didn't know what they were looking for. And they get close, and then they're within what's called the plot. That means that the radar can't tell the difference. Like the radar and this thing the radar's telling them they're in the same general area as this thing, and they can't differentiate anymore. So now they've got to look around to find whatever it is. They don't even know what they're looking for. And they see above the ocean what they call some whitewash, and they're getting some spray. Something's going down on the ocean, and it's a beautiful day out, so they can see very clearly. And so they start looking down, and then they see this object, and that's when they called it the Tic Tac, because it was an white oblong object. It did have these little things, Andrew, sticking out under it, which people don't really usually talk about, but it was this white oblong object, and it was moving very erratically, bunk, 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 almost like a ping pong ball. And they said, usually if they saw, let's say, a helicopter down there, there'd be more spray in the air, and the helicopters kind of go, woo, when they want to change, and then kind of wait, and then kind of come back. But this thing was going all over the place. It was very erratic. And so Commander Fravor, he's leading the group, and he says, I'm going to go down there and see what that is. So he starts coming down, and the other plane stays up high and watches both of what's going on. He starts coming down, and all of a sudden, the Tic Tac, which is over the ocean, turns and starts coming up to meet him. And they start this dance in the sky where one's coming down, the other's coming up. And Commander Fravor said, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change trajectory and I'm going to go straight at this thing. And he changed trajectory and he started going at this thing, and all of a sudden this thing left. It vanished. It just like started to accelerate and completely disappeared. And he got very close. I forget the distance. I don't retain those kind of numbers, but he got very close to this object, seeing it with his eyes, and he felt this thing, knew that he was coming down towards it. It felt like it reacted to him, and it was intelligent enough that it saw it, he had changed trajectories and it was coming straight at it, and it accelerated and left. He asked the person who was watching above, where did it go? And they said, I don't know, we don't see it anymore. So they went back down to look at the ocean at what was causing this splash under the ocean. And they said there was nothing there anymore. There was no splash. There was nothing there. So they were freaked out, of course. But he said, well, we have training to do. Let's go to our cap point. Now, I forget what that stands for, but in the military, it's a point in the sky where you go to begin your training. And as they're going there, he hears again from the guys on the boat, whatever, that's watching all the radar. He hears them say, you're not going to believe this, sir, but that thing is at your cap point. And nobody knows where this point is. It's very secret. There's only a few people who know where these planes are going to meet up in the sky, what latitude and longitude they're going to be at. And this object was there before they didn't even get there yet. So that means there was some kind of intelligence. It was giving some kind of communication. Haha, look, I'm here already. They got there. They didn't see it. They completed their training and they went back and they landed on the ship. They're talking and talking and talking. And the next crew that was going to go up heard them talking. Oh my gosh, what was that? And the backseater who's in charge of taking the film said, I'm going to go find this thing. And so the next two go up and they go to the cap point, the original cap point. And that's when you get the video, because they actually could, on their infrared video, get the images that we know as the Tic Tac. That was 2004. That commander, David Fravor, was one of the people at the hearing. And so he gave essentially what I just told you, that testimony to Congress under oath that was his experience in 2004. One of the other really important people who gave his testimony was Ryan Graves, Lieutenant Ryan Graves. Both of these guys since retired. Ryan Graves' story is off the East Coast, in between Virginia and Florida. On the East Coast is a training ground where he was stationed over there in Virginia, and they do their training over there. Also a Navy pilot. Well, his plane had gotten, and a bunch of the other ones had gotten their radar upgraded, so that when they were going out to do their training, they were seeing things on their radar. And they, again, assumed it was a glitch or something at first. And they were seeing these things every single day on their radar. And so once they realized that it wasn't a glitch, there was something out there, a couple of the guys in his squadron went to see if they could find these things. Well, I think before that even happened, when they come back from doing their training in the air, they go back through like a little area that's kind of the doorway in the sky that the planes would go back to the ships through this kind of like space in the sky. And these two of them were flying back to head back to the ship, and one of these objects was at that point in the sky with all this traffic, and they drove by it so close and got their eyeballs on it, they said they almost hit it. Now, these were a different type of object, not the Tic Tac. They described these objects as being a cube, a dark cube in a translucent sphere. And that's what they almost hit. So Ryan Graves was very concerned about this. He eventually got trained to be a safety officer, and he was concerned that there was almost a mid-air collision with one of these objects. Well, some other day, one of the people in his squadron saw these things on their radar and went out to get a real camera image of it. That's the gimbal image. And if you hear in the beginning of this video, there's a couple of the guys saying, "Oh my gosh, what's that? There's a whole fleet of them." Well, the public sees this image of a weird shaped craft turning, and that's why they called it a gimbal, because it like turns like a gimbal, because it doesn't turn like this, like a normal plane needs a lot of area to be able to turn. This thing's just turning like basically like this, okay? And that's why they called it the gimbal. Well, apparently in front of the gimbal was a V-shaped formation of these other craft, these other, I don't know, these other cubes in the spheres, but they didn't get an image of that. They only got it of the big object. And then the go fast image is also, video is also recorded by the same squadron. So Lieutenant Graves, as far as I understand, never saw the object himself with his own eyes, but he saw them on radar every single day, and then people in his squadron had the eyeball on it experiences. Well, he was one of the other witnesses at this hearing, and that was in 2015 when his experiences happened, and he was one of the other witnesses at the hearing, raising his hand, you know, swearing to tell the truth and telling that experience. And then the third person I'll talk to you about that was at the hearing and a major witness is a new person who has come out. His name is David Grush. He's considered a whistleblower, while the other two pilots aren't. They're just telling their experience, but he's considered a whistleblower. So I'm going to go all the way back to after December 16th, 2017. There was, after those articles, there was a couple of things that happened in Congress. And one of the things that happened was that President Trump signed into law this, I think that one was the Intelligence Authorization Act, that had in there the requirement for something that was called the UAP Task Force to research all the files, all the evidence that the government had on UAPs, and to put together a report within 180 days after the enactment of that act. So that was signed in December of 2020. So June 2021, a report came out. It was only 9 pages, that was unclassified. But in that report, they said from 2004, David Fravor's incident, to 2021, they had 144 reports of unidentified objects. Now, they didn't scour every kind of report the government had. And by the way, I should say, only a year or two before that, I think it was 2 years before that report came out, the US Navy said you have to report these things, because this is another important point. Before this time, people were nervous about saying they saw something because they would get called in and sometimes they would be sent to a psychiatrist and they could lose their flying ability if they reported these things. So people were nervous, and so there wasn't a lot of reports. But about the year 2000-ish, that started to change when the US Navy said, yes, we want you to tell us what you experienced. And so there were more reports. So this 9-page report came out June 2021, had 144 reports of unidentifieds. One was identified as a deflating balloon. So that left 143 reports that they didn't know what it was. Well, this UAP task force morphed year after year, and now it's called ARROW. The advanced, let me see, what is it? ARROW. Is it the Advanced Anomalous Resolution Office? It's not advanced. I forget what the first one is, Andrew, but it's called ARROW, AARO. And that's what's, but this has morphed. So there's been a place in government. Yeah, if you can get that, if you can research that, that'd be wonderful, what that's called. So there's a place within the government that's supposed to be researching UAP. Well, while it was named the UAP task force before the ARROW got stood up, there was a couple people assigned to looking for the information. One of these people is David Grush. So he went out and he's tried to look at all the different places that the government would have been researching UAP. And he found that there were secret programs, SAPs sometimes they're called, that were somehow also related to not just government, but corporate places. So I don't know how many years ago it is, but Lieutenant Corso wrote a book the day after Roswell. And in that book, he tells his personal experience that Roswell was a real crash and that there were other crashes. And he was tasked with giving material to corporations, and I think he even said academic institutions, to do the research on it. And what happened was, because this information went to corporations, you can't FOIA it. You can't use the Freedom of Information Act to request information from a corporation, so it stays hidden. So what Grush found is that there are these programs, it's called reverse engineering programs, that are hidden in the government perhaps, but also in these corporate institutions. Nobody has brought up academic institutions lately, so I'm not 100% on that. But what David Grush testified during this hearing was that many people, he interviewed at least 40 witnesses who told him about their first-hand knowledge and or participation in reverse engineering programs. He himself was not allowed access into these programs, so he himself has never seen the material firsthand, nor been inside these programs firsthand. But he's swearing that he has all the information from other people that have told them that these programs exist. So that was, I hope that was a little, that might have been too long, Andrew, but what did you think about that and anything you want to say?
Oh, that was great touching on the important points. Glad you did that. And again, I encourage people to watch your presentation on the Portal to Ascension YouTube channel for the greater detail of that stuff. Very worth talking about, especially with what's going on in the present day. And well, I was traveling through New Jersey this past Saturday to go to a Coastal Rhythms medicine dance event on the shore, and I think I saw on the highway on one of the panels by the highway safety board or whatever that put up, they were apparently trying to make a joke out of this whole alien thing. They said driving your car safely on the highway is not an alien thing or something like that. So I guess even they are getting in on this stuff to let people know, hey, wake up and realize what's going on around you. There is aliens here. Let's at the very least we can maybe try to make a joke out of it to calm the mood for those that can't handle the truth. So that's great to touch on that. Now we have presentation topics. You got a whole slew of things here. I guess we'll do a couple of them, and then I'm going to make the rest of this show pay-per-view for the rest that want to hear about this stuff. We still got about 25 minutes or so. So let's talk about one of the things here. 10 ways to awaken your intuition. I guess rather than touch on those 10 ways in great detail, I'd rather you list those things and maybe briefly get into them. And then for those that want to watch your presentation, they can do that themselves on what that is. So 10 ways to awaken your intuition. What are those 10 things? And maybe expand on them just a little bit, each one of them.
When I teach how to awaken your intuition, one of the things I like to start with is the theory of multiple intelligences. It's a theory that was developed by Howard Gardner, who's a Harvard University professor, and it was originally a psychological theory, and then it got used a lot in education because what it says is that everybody has 8 intelligences, not just you're smart or you're not, which is how I grew up. You know, you took an IQ test one day and that number was supposed to tell you how smart you are. Like, how ridiculous, but everybody believed that for the longest time. Well, I love this theory because the theory is that some people process information really well visually. I do that. In order for me to remember something, I really need to see it. That's how I remember things. But some people are really good with words, and they can listen to a lecture and remember everything. I can't. It's kind of in one ear, out the other. But some people are really good with that. Some people need to learn with their bodies. These are sports people. Sometimes people who really love to be in athletics, they don't do as well sitting still in a classroom. Well, that's because their body helps them learn. And then there's other ones, like some people are really good with music, some people are really good with math. Some people like to learn in a group environment. Some people need to be quiet, sitting alone, reading their books, okay? So everybody has a different way that they learn the best. Well, this correlates with how to be intuitive because, like I said, I'm very visual. So when I want to be intuitive and get in touch with my intuition, I need to calm down, but I can use like an icon or an image that I look at that starts to raise my vibration. Like I have an image of what's called the Salvator Mundi. It's an image that Leonardo da Vinci painted, and it sold at Christie's auction for the highest piece of art ever. And it's an image of Jesus as the savior of the world, holding an orb with 3 little occlusions or dots in this crystal orb. And I just love it. That when I see that image, it helps me get to my center. So when you want to be intuitive, one of the most important things is to come to your center, to get quiet and not have a lot of distraction in taking up your bandwidth, let's say. You become centered, And then you pay attention to what's going on right inside of you, your own let's say screen that's going on. And so some people will see images, some people will hear things, some people will feel things in their bodies. And I don't know if I can ask you, Andrew, like when you want to be intuitive, how do you feel you actually receive information?
Well, I tend to think it's not necessarily something that you can control. It seems to be more spontaneous, like something like it's one of those life comes at you fast things where they you can't really necessarily. Well, some people can, but I in general, intuition, being guided on when things, how I should do things and when they should happen, they seem to happen right on the spot with me. I think with like when I'm not really expecting it to happen, that's when it comes to me, when a thought just happens or something, or a flow of thoughts or some sort of synchronicity that is leading me in the right direction. So
that's one of the other things I talk about, Andrew, is synchronicity and the importance of that. Synchronicity is, I believe it's kind of showing you that you're on the right path. And that is what intuition is, accessing, I believe, who you really are. I think from the nature of reality, your podcast, you also might share this idea, and maybe I'll ask you this question, because we're not our physical bodies. This is just the vehicle that we're experiencing and gathering all this data and all these experiences in this lifetime, but we're truly a way higher vibrating soul that is evolving, and lifetime after a lifetime we are attaching to different bodies that then help us with get this experience, help us evolve. When that body dies, our soul's still there, and then it attaches to another body in another lifetime. So to me, being intuitive is coming to your center and actually tuning in to who you truly are, and that higher vibrating soul has access to way more information.
yes, that's the higher self definitely has some role in that. So let's see what else. Okay, as above, so below, the teachings of. Well, actually, before we get into that, I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to say, folks, the rest of this interview, pay-per-view, subscribe on Patreon. Nothing wrong with me asking to make a little profit off my work. We did touch on very important things in this early part of the interview. Not that the stuff that we touch on later on won't be as important, but still worth talking about, and folks, definitely worth subscribing so you can hear into this. So rest of this interview is pay-per-view. That being said,